mobilize and stop this pipeline. Of course, we know that earlier this year, the Biden administration took a good step in canceling the permits around the pipeline, which, you know, were reinvigorated by the Trump administration. So at least down here, you know, that is a good sign. That's something that we as Indigenous organizers, climate justice organizers, frontline organizers have been working for decades, like I said. So shout out to all of the people who have stuck with the movement for so long. We did it. And yeah, so we're here, and I know that there's, you know, a bigger tale to tell on the other side of the medicine line, the other side of the border, quote unquote. So yeah, before we get into all of that, I just wanted to start off by, you know, sensing into how you're doing, how you're feeling. You've been a part of this movement for so long, from the beginning, I would say. And so, yeah, just how does this news make you feel? How does this victory, yeah, how does this victory for someone who's been involved for so long, since day one, how does this land for you?
Well, I mean, first of all, Tanse Gwakia, thank you for having me here, NDN Collective, and Tanse, hello relatives across Turtle Island and around the world. Just wanted to send my greetings out to you. Well, being from in a community that's directly impacted by tar sands extraction, and the KXL was a tar sands, going to be filled with tar sands. So the product, quote unquote, would come from our traditional territories, our homelands in north of the Medicine Line in so-called Treaty 8 territory and so-called Canada, where I was born. I was born in a small Indigenous community. It means that will have less impact at what we call ground zero, at the site of destruction. And so for us, it's a huge victory for the land and for the people that are living the toxic burdens of oil and gas and tar sands and fracking and all the extraction processes that come out. There's literally 400,000 kilometers of pipeline in Alberta, in so-called Canada, which we call Little Texas, because that's where tar sands is. And it basically fuels everyone down south. It gives a lot of oil and gas products to our American relatives. And so it's a huge victory when we have, for us anyways, for us to know that there'll be some reprieve on the land for the air, the water, our four-legged ones, our winged ones, all of the fish nations, all of the animals and people that are being completely, like, you know, environmental genocide. And that's what's happening. If you come up to where we're from, it spans as big as the state of Florida. So we're talking about a site of destruction, one of the largest on the face of the planet. And so that's what KXL is connected to, and that's the fight it's connected to as well, from our perspective up here north of the Medicine Line.
Thanks, Melina. Yeah. Thank you for segueing us or leading us into, you know, this next question I have for you, which is to really ground us in the context of this issue. I think it's really important that we hear and learn context about how these movements began. So I'm wondering if you can continue to elaborate and share the origin story of the KXL movement from your perspective. And you know, one of the most profound, like, movement moments for me was a couple years ago when we were in Alberta. We were up in those territories, and it was like we were having like a fishbowl moment. So it's when you have like people in the center and you kind of sit around them and listen in. And it was you and Tom Goldtooth and Ariel Deranger and maybe a couple other people, but we just got to listen to how this movement, this fight against KXL originated. And that for me was such a, even though I was there for most of it, it was so grounding and powerful to hear your story, all the stories. So yeah, can you share a bit, like I said, about the origin story of this movement, And, you know, which I know from like the kind of strategy side of things, campaign building side of things, that it started as a strategy to end the tar sands. So yeah, can you share some of that history to us?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's like we definitely got to give props to the generation that came before us. In 1984, there was actually Chief Dorothy McDonald who called for public basically outrage, but also just public hearings on tar sands because there was no consent or consultation for Indigenous communities that were being the most impacted. So it started with, like, for me, I look up to her. She's passed on from health issues, but I look up to somebody like her that was, you know, in the 80s, in the 90s, growing up, like, we only called it the rigs. So it was a thing where no one talked about the extreme transition from conventional to tar sands. And so it was this huge awareness raising that started in the 80s and 90s, but very, you know, very isolated, very, it felt very lonely. Like for me, even coming in as a, you know, I was on the blockade for my community for all this extraction that was happening in the 80s. Like I was 7, you know, so our communities have been fighting tar sands and extractivism in our territories, blocking roads and all of the things that we still see happening across Turtle Island. So it's a thing that I've inherited as coming into this movement. And then as, you know, late teens, early 20s, started learning how to organize through campaigning like Indigenous Peoples Power Project, shout out to IP3 and Ruckus Society, that were training up young people like me to start campaigning and going and developing strategies. And I was fortunate enough to meet other young Indigenous peoples like myself that were outraged and were upset. You know, it's pretty mortifying. Like when you go see, they block you off a lot from these sites of destruction until you like trespass, I guess they want to call it, in our territories. But so there's things where you can't even get access to information. You can't even get access to the research. The research isn't being shown to communities. And so we started actually went back to do my master's and started researching and uncovering what was not being shared with communities. And what we found was just, you know, like high levels of petrochemicals, high levels of toxicity, which communities knew anecdotally, but the research wasn't being shared. So communities were being exposed. And so it started from a human health crisis, and then a land crisis, and then also an Indigenous rights violation crises, and then, you know, an environmental crises where other environmental groups joined in eventually, but it was literally from the sound of Indigenous women in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, and then which I joined. So I just want to give like recognition to where recognition is due, for all of the people that, you know, we have social media now, so you can kind of see the faces of people, but back then, you know, it was just, you're in the bush, right? Like you're in the bush doing all of these actions, and it was hella scary. Like, you know, we're like blocking highways, and like we didn't have social media back then. And so it felt really scary. It felt very alone, but because I was able to find an affinity group with my other Indigenous brothers and sisters like Ariel, Clayton, Heather, shout out, the people from the north, that we started making alliances with people like, yeah, Tom, Dallas, like IEN, and then just making those connections and then creating strategies. So it was around, a lot of what we did was we actually went outside of Canada, because at the time we had a right-wing government, and that just was shutting down any conversation around these impacts. And we went to Europe, and we did a lot of international campaigning. I actually testified before US Congress against the KXL in 2012. So there was a lot of that happened. But then in 2011 is when most of the people started seeing this come out, where, you know, people started getting arrested in Washington, and that's where people started seeing more the visual in America. But yeah, there was a lot of actions and activities of shutting, like we shut stuff down in 2009, like in the mines and like refineries, and we're doing a lot of actions across the country and into Europe, where a lot of we're trying to get divestment. So there was a lot of things that were happening that you couldn't see. It was behind the scenes. And then in 2011, everyone converged on Washington, and there was that agreement made between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples to campaign in that way. And we saw, you know, over 1,000 people arrested in Washington. And so that's where I think people see, you know, the beginning, the birth of that. But it definitely did happen. It started, you know, little by little, previous to that, of a lot of campaigners on the ground doing kind of that groundwork, research, strategy, skill sharing, and capacity building.
Oh no, I think we have a little bit of a lag here. It might be me. Thanks everyone. I was chatting away and the sound was off. Well, we're gonna wait for Melina to join us again. In the meantime, just, you know, want to underscore Melina's points about giving credit to all of the matriarchs who invigorated this No KXL movement. Okay, here I see Melina. All right. Getting reconnected. Thanks for your patience, everyone. Hey.
Hey.
We're, yep, just, you know, everyone's familiar with the Wi-Fi lags and the Zoom dropouts. It's just a part of our lives now. So, yeah, I think you cut out just talking about kind of like the building capacity in across Indian country, you know, across Turtle Island, to really build up this movement, yeah, post to 2011.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, totally dropped off. I was right into my rant and my goal. But yeah, I think mostly what I was saying is that, yeah, there was strategy that went behind this. There was connection, community, relationship building, trust, kind of anti-oppression trainings when it came to working with non-Indigenous folks. There was a lot of kind of behind the scenes work that went into this this whole campaign. And it was, I mean, I just was really, really excited to see finally, you know, the zombie pipeline killed, because it's just been a long time. It's been a long time.
Yeah, yeah. And for those who are just joining or learning about the movement, it's referred to as the zombie pipeline because it's come back alive. It's been reinvigorated by the U.S. government, and I'm pretty sure it's been like pretty much carried through by on the Canadian side by the company throughout the years. Is that correct? Yeah.
It is correct.
Yeah.
And they're
So,
based right in Alberta, where the pipeline would come from. And they have pipelines crisscrossing already across this country. So they're just used to getting their way here. They've
mhm.
done the same thing in our community. They built the North Central Corridor pipeline in 2008, and our nation was basically getting, like, we got over 100 signatories from environmental and human rights groups. We took it to the UN. Like, it was a thing that was already happening. Communities were already pushing back against pipelines. We were also fighting the Enbridge pipeline, which went west coast, which was also stopped in coalition with nations from Alberta and nations across that pipeline. So yeah, the work was kind of underhand, and so they became big in their, like, national regional spots. But I think what became so huge about KXL is that it became like a cross-border collaboration and a cross-border solidarity with Indigenous nations from the north and south along the corridor route, but also from site of destruction in our homelands in the tar sands, but then all across North America, with folks in Turtle Island, folks getting arrested in Washington. And so I think that's where a lot of people started to take notice.
Mm. Yeah,
I hope it doesn't freeze again.
yeah, I can speak for myself. Oh no, I can hear you. There might be like a lag.
I know, it keeps freezing.
Oh no.
Oh, Wi-Fi.
Oh, Wi-Fi.
Mhm.
Well, can you hear me at all?
I can.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, speaking for myself, KXL was definitely one of the bigger moments in my life that it really taught me about intersectional organizing and multiracial organizing, and 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 the importance of building that capacity in our movements. So yeah, we've kind of gone present, past, and I want to move us into like the future. So yesterday or the day before, when the announcement came out, we were texting. Oh, is she frozen? Oops. I wonder, Melina, these types of gaps, and yeah, we're just gonna hold tight for a minute and see if we can get Melina just for a few more minutes to wrap up this discussion. But appreciate all of you joining and listening in. I hope everyone is taking time this week to celebrate this victory and honor the work that really has gone into this moment. Um, all right, so we're waiting for Melina to come back on. Hey everyone, thanks for joining. We're here with Melina Laboucan-Massismo, who's actually a board member to NDN Collective. Um, and we're having a little bit of Wi-Fi issues, but I know everyone understands how that goes. So we're just holding tight and hoping that Melina's connection gets strong again. In the meantime, if people have questions regarding KXL and the decision or the announcement that was made by Trans Canada, please drop them in the questions. There's a question icon and I'm tracking it. So yeah, drop your questions there. So for those just joining, and just a recap, we were talking with Melina around the history and the context of the KXL or the No KXL movement, and I know that history and context is important for understanding, you know, how these movements came to be, and really honoring, you know, who helped initiate these movements or who helped bring them up. And Melina shared that a lot of it was Indigenous women from up north. Okay, I'm seeing Melina come back, so give me a moment to, here we go. Yay. All right, folks, we're getting back online with Melina. Thanks for your patience. Hey, we're back.
I just shut down a bunch of things and hoping that, so hopefully, and I took it off Wi-Fi. I'm on my data, so fingers crossed it won't keep kicking me off. So sorry about that.
Oh yeah, no worries. We know how it goes. And yeah, thanks for doing that. So yeah, I was just about to segue us, and I also know that we have limited time here. So we kind of touched on the present, which the announcement, how you feel about it. We talked about the past. So I want to move us into the future and like the path forward. So yesterday or the day before when we were texting and acknowledging, you know, what had just happened, you had mentioned that there's so much more work to focus on than KXL or maybe than pipelines. I know for one that I'm tired of fighting pipelines. But yeah, can you elaborate on what you meant by that and yeah, just, you know, kind of generally speaking, what else can we as Indigenous organizers be and peoples be focusing on now that the zombie pipeline is permanently dead?
Yeah, so much to focus on. I mean, I meant it in the sense of it's like hard to work on something for like 12 plus years and just like keep like being revived over and over. But so I'm happy it's dead, and like shout out to everybody that had like a hand in helping with this, because it's the people power that stopped this pipeline. I just want to acknowledge that. And then also, I think for me as an organizer that's been organizing since I was a teenager, you know, be like coming up to 20 years. I think what I'm noticing as somebody that's been in the movement for a while is this way of being, the ways in which we kind of like reenact without knowing it, this like hyper productivity, over productivity, because we're always in crises, and then we're like starting to develop what I've noticed in my body. I've started to develop a way of being, of just like rushing and like anger and just like all of the things that are important, the passion that's important for all of us to do this work, because otherwise I don't think any of it would get done. But I think for me, I'm reevaluating as an older organizer of like, how do I do this in a way that's sustainable? How do I do this in a way that I can stay in this work for the long haul? Because a couple of years back, I was bedridden. I literally worked myself to a point of exhaustion. And I think a lot of other organizers my age know that, and they see that. And when I was in my 20s and early 30s, I was like, whatever, I don't need to listen to you. I don't need to like, I got this, you know, and I'm going to take care of it the way that I want to see fit, and like not prioritizing enough what quote unquote, I just not so happy about the word self-care, because it's so individualized. And like, how do we get to collective liberation? How do we get to collective healing? How do we get away from even cancel culture? How do we get to a place of restorative justice and ways in which we're loving ourselves and the ways in which we work in love with one another? And I think for us, there's always going to be local, like if you're Indigenous, everything's political. Your whole life is political. Where you're born, there's always going to be an issue. So I can't tell somebody that they need to work on that or that, because they have their own home issues that they're going to have to work on. And we all deal with, you know, immense welfare dependency, state poverty, enforced poverty, and all of the things, housing issues. You know, I think every Indigenous person that I meet that's doing something in their community, like that is of the utmost value to strengthen our communities, decolonize, defend our communities, and do all the things that we need to do to get to a place of healing and restoration, and also vibrancy, you know, because I feel like I was surviving, and I'm like, I was not thriving, and nor do I feel that way. And I really want to stay in this work for the long haul. But there's some days where I'm like, can I actually do this? Can I actually stay in this for the long haul if I'm just constantly on the grind? And so how do we kind of do this like baton passing of sharing that burden within our nations, within our communities, within our families? Um, you know, not all of us have movement families, but, you know, maybe we have movement communities, movement people that we consider family. And so I think it's like, how do we build each other up and bring about the collective healing? And for me, that's why looking at this word and idea of healing justice and what collective liberation means in those as we move forward into building and decolonizing the ways in which we exist in movement spaces. Because for me, I know when I see it, when I've had friends that have committed suicide, that I've also have had friends that have left the movement, and also have had friends that are incredibly sick. I myself deal with health issues and the toxic burden from being from a tar sands impacted community. These are important things that we need to also look at, how we're bringing younger ones up into this movement and not enforcing this kind of like white supremacist overproductivity thing, still addressing the crisis, but still needing to take care of one another and bringing back that love that was so part of Indigenous governance, Indigenous collective healing. So for me, that's a huge thing that I'm really trying to wrap my head around as I try to stay in this work for the long haul.
Mm. I was hoping you would touch on all of that, Melina. I just so respect how, yeah, you've been kind of like a guide, or like a reminder, a mentor, if you will, around integrating all of those values and principles into this work. And so, yeah, I'm so happy you shared that out as work that we can be focusing and also prioritizing in our movement and organizing work. Um, I know you have to go, so I want to just ask a quick question, brief, around how we can be supporting you from down here, our relatives across the medicine line up in Canada, so-called Canada, to achieve climate justice.
Yeah, I think, you know, for us, even though we killed the KXL, that's such a harsh word, but even though, you know, the black snake is dead, in this one stake, there's tentacles all across North America that come out from our traditional territory. So if you don't know what the tar sands is, please look it up, because inevitably you're filling your gas tank with it. You know, like the extractivism that's happening in our homelands touches every part of North America, to our Indigenous and BIPOC brothers and sisters in the refinery communities in California, to Houston, Texas. It is spread out across Turtle Island and around the world, going through tankers. So yeah, just like look that up and understand, you know, that there's communities that are like, for me, I'm always going to be from one of those impacted communities where I go home and there's another extractive industry building another, you know, we're literally surrounded of oil and gas wells. So just, if you can, stand with your brothers and sisters communities as well, even though many of us are.
All right, I think we might have lost Melina in that final question and response. And I do know that Melina had to have a hard stop. So we all know that, you know, we have meetings upon meetings, and we're all very busy people. So I'll just give it a moment here to see if she rejoins us for some final comments. But you know, I do want to just share some resources and point you all to where you can learn about Melina's work. So Melina hosted a television show in that aired across Canada, so-called Canada, called Power to the People. And it's all about how Indigenous peoples are across, well, First Nations, I should say, First Nations peoples are building regenerative solutions and economies across their territories up north. So I really recommend trying to find out how to watch that show. I know it's easier to access up in, if you're from up north in Canada. Um, and then Melina works with Indigenous Climate Action. She's a co-founder. So I would, yeah, look into the work that ICA is doing. They're building out curriculum and toolkits to train up our organizers, our next generation of organizers. And so, yeah, go to their website. It's indigenousclimateaction.org, and look into their tools and resources, and also into the healing justice work that Melina is carrying. So yeah, thank you, Brandy. I see you in the comments. Yeah, this healing justice work is so critical to how we thrive and sustain in this really, really hard, heavy organizing work. So I just really appreciate Melina lifting all of that up, and especially now as we've met a victory, I think it's important to yeah, to honor that joy, honor, you know, all of the hard work, and like we said earlier, just prioritize that as we move forward into new fights and ongoing fights. Um, and, you know, as always, you can engage with NDN Collective on our channels here, by, yeah, showing up and commenting. I'm seeing everyone here right now, and we have lots of programs. We have the Radical Imagination Grant. You know, that is open until June 18th. So that's for all of our Indigenous and Native artists across Turtle Island and beyond. If you are involved in some sort of cultural practice or art form and you need resources to continue that work, we want to support you. So please look into that, and then keep your eyes out for some exciting announcements regarding our climate justice work. We will be sharing some materials and launching our campaign in the next few weeks. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And I'm gonna log off now because I don't see Melina joining back, but I appreciate all of you joining us and having patience for the time we did have. And please take good care. Be well, everyone. Thanks.